I remember being asked, what's your favourite time management hack? And I would say, well, don't manage time, find the right person who's already done it. And then, because they will condense your learning so quickly. I walked into the opening ceremony. My family had been texting me. So I'm one of 5 kids, mum and dad up in the stand. And I walked in through the tunnel. I was looking up on the right. They said, we're up on your right as you come in. I saw them up in the crowd. Still gives me goosebumps.
Welcome to the M26 FIT Podcast, where we explore the connection between having a strong mind and a strong body.
All right, today's special guest is Toby Jenkins. Now, Toby's an Olympian representing Australia at the 2004 Athens Olympics in water polo. He's a husband, father, and award-winning entrepreneur, author, mentor, international speaker, and executive coach. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Magnus. Thanks for having me, mate. It's great to be here.
Mate, that is not a bad sounding bio, is it?
Oh, it's interesting, right? Like bios are, it's great. I mean, I'm really proud of all of that. Most proud of the husband and the father piece. But it's great. I've been fortunate enough to have a lot of experiences in my life.
Yeah, fantastic. I thought we should start at the beginning. So what was childhood like for you growing up? And one thing that I think might be interesting for our listeners is, what would your mum say about you as a boy?
Yeah, look, I think I remember having a pretty cheerful childhood, to be honest. You know, we grew up, I was in a very privileged position, you know, a son of 2 doctors. We grew up in, you know, with a bit of space and backing onto a bit of bush in Ashgrove in Brisbane here. And yeah, I mean, mum has said since that I was a pretty cheerful kid, typically all along. And so, yeah, I mean, growing up was great. Enjoyed it thoroughly and always enjoyed getting outside and exploring, all that kind of stuff.
Fantastic. Would you consider yourself a bit academic or sporty, or what were your natural tendencies?
Yeah, I mean, I loved all sport. I really enjoyed school and study and the academics of everything as well. I think one of the things that I've always been interested in is just variety. What does that mean? Well, yeah, like I never wanted to just play sport. I always wanted to study at the same time, for instance. My mum and dad were really big on me studying all the way through, even as I was starting to make some of the state and national teams as a junior. And so I always have enjoyed diversity and you know, that idea that there's a whole lot of life to be explored in lots of different dimensions. So it's been fun, mate. I've been lucky in a lot of ways.
So university, what did you study at university?
I did a commerce degree in the end. I started off, when I left high school, or even in high school, I wanted to do genetics because that was a booming field at the time, and I figured, genetics would be really interesting. And then I sort of started to learn a bit more about business, and I thought, maybe the commercialization of, you know, genetics and biotech and all that kind of stuff. That was, I found fascinating. But then the reality of training set in. So I was training, 12, 13 times a week. And as the water polo career was getting more and more serious, I had an invitation post high school to go to the Australian Institute of Sport for a year with the senior men's program at the time. And so as a 18-year-old straight out of school, I took that and went down there for a year. And just the competing demands meant that the science was a bit harder to pursue because it required more contact hours, whereas the commerce and the business side of things I was always interested in too. So I decided to ditch the science, go with the stuff that was a bit easier to study while I was away and travelling and all that sort of thing. And thoroughly enjoyed most of that for the most part too.
So with the water polo career, when did that start?
I remember so I first started in year 8, had a cracking coach, an English guy called Peter Love, who was so enthusiastic about the game and had a great group of guys that we were playing with at school, which was awesome. And through school, I realised, there was this opportunity to play some of the district and regional teams and missed out on a couple along the way, as inevitably happens. That lit the fire to keep going, made a state team, made the Australian under-17 team in year 10, and travelled to Singapore, Hungary, Slovenia, Germany on a tour as a 16-year-old, and that was just dream come true stuff. And really, again, sort of just got me more and more excited about this game that I loved. And so, I made the Aussie schoolboys team, was interested in obviously good enough to be invited to the Australian Institute of Sport as a part of that training squad. And this was, Sydney had been announced by this stage too. So, Sydney Olympics, everyone wanted a piece of that. In the end, I missed out on that. But, really going to the AIS was about, I remember being really uncertain about going. And ultimately, I think what the question that helped me the most in that moment was, what will I regret? Will I regret going and not enjoying it, or will I regret staying and wondering how it went or how it might have gone? And there's no doubt in my mind that the year down there, it was incredibly challenging in lots of levels, and it was, it set me up though to be the player that was capable of making an Olympics in Athens, in the next cycle. So there's no doubt that was the decision that helped me along the path for sure.
Yeah. I heard an interesting saying about that. When you've got a decision to make, choose the thing that makes you grow. So, which I found was interesting, just as when you just caught up and like you've just pointed out, you've just done that thing that's challenged you, and you never ever regret that. You don't lay in your hospital bed when you're 90 going, I regret doing that. You obviously regret things you don't do.
Yep.
What's your earliest recollection of, right, actually, I think I could go all the way. I want to get to the Olympics?
Well, I remember writing down in an application to the Queensland Academy of Sport when I was 14. So this was, I guess I'd played a season of the school competition and loved it, and started at the club and loved that. And then we had to apply to be a part of a winter program. And in that, I said I wanted to play for Australia. So I wrote that down as a part of the application process and was accepted into the program at the time, a development program. And that was, 14, I guess.
Okay.
Was, the initiation of this idea that I might play for Australia. Yeah.
You mentioned like you were doing, 12, 16 training sessions a week. What are some behind the scenes that you could give us? So what the public don't see. So you're at that level, at the elite level. What's the training regimen look like? What nutrition?
Yep.
Any struggles with injuries? Just walk us through that.
Yeah, sure. So I think, training volume, I don't think there's any sport or pursuit that doesn't have a training volume attached to it. Our weeks were split up into strength and conditioning, swimming, gameplay, skills development. So in water polo, there's a fair bit that goes into it, obviously. And the parts, I guess, that I realised, and certainly the Queensland Academy of Sport opened my eyes to, was that there were all those other disciplines. Because at the time, I was just trying to eat as much as I could because I was hungry all the time. And then, you start to be informed and learn about nutrition from the nutritionist, psychology from the psychologist, strength and conditioning from, the S&C guy, swimming from... I was lucky. I feel like I had an amazing group of people around me. The water polo coach was obviously my primary coach, but I had coaching across the board. And what I recognised, and probably has been one of my superpowers over my career in hindsight, has been my willingness to ask for help. And so I have asked... I remember, the guy who was our S&C coach probably put on the most muscle that I've ever seen anyone put on at that time. And so I thought, here's a guy I can learn from. Same was, I started going to swim with Shannon Rollerson, who was the Australian national swimming coach at the time. He coached Jodie Henry and a bunch of others.
Wow.
Alice Mills, He was a Brizzy guy training out of Chandler. And I remember thinking, wow, this is really different to the swimming that my water polo coach does. And then, there was a centre forward who'd moved up he'd played 350 games or something for Australia. He'd moved up from Sydney to Brizzy. I said, hey, Ray, can we go and do some sessions together on centre forward because that was my position. He got me carrying a shot put around in my bag to uni and stuff. So I was wandering around. That was probably something not a lot of people would have seen. And I would walk around holding this shot put to try to strengthen my forearms and grip and that kind of stuff for the wrestling that goes on in a water polo game. Yeah, so that was cool. And yeah, so this pattern has played out, Magnus, in lots of ways. And I think the lesson from that for me is that the investment in finding someone who I respect or admire, who's done what I've already done or what I'm trying to do, and I remember being asked, what's your favourite time management hack? And I would say, well, don't manage time, find the right person who's already done it, and then because they will condense your learning so quickly. And I think that's been something that I've unconsciously applied in lots of different areas for a long time, and I think that's been the gift and the privilege really of growing up in the place that I've grown up in, and having bumped into these people, along the time. From an injury and that kind of thing standpoint, it was interesting. We were talking about this the other day, weren't we? But the injury side of things, like what was going on in water polo at the time and on the path to an Olympics, was reasonably controlled and controllable and knowable. And I knew obviously injury was a risk. But the things that I found most challenging that nearly derailed that pursuit was the divorce of my parents, relationship challenges with girlfriends at the time and really feeling lost. Friends of mine who took their own lives at that period. They were the curveballs that I hadn't, when I think about water polo as a pursuit, it was actually all the curveballs that sit around that. Because water polo felt very defined and in fact was in a lot of ways my safe space.
Yeah. But I'm just wondering, from a controllability perspective, I guess you kind of had more control around that, and then some of those other curveballs were things that were obviously well and truly out of your control that were unexpected as well.
Completely, yeah. And I think about this a lot now, and in the coaching work that I do with my clients, is the certainty is there will be curveballs. Things that you can't know about, you can't anticipate, or even if you do anticipate them, you don't know when, right? It's actually less about if, but definitely about when.
Yes. And
you can't control the timing. So the ability to sort of recognise that, I think, has definitely been a pattern as well for me. Yeah.
So that probably leads on, say, mental strength, mental resilience, mental fitness. There's obviously a lot of different words running around to describe that. What are your thoughts around that resilience piece and the strength piece around the mind? Just on that, actually, my last guest, Gilly, he mentioned that, and the coaching that he's had and all the superior coaches, that it's 70% mental and 30% physical in a lot of sports, and obviously going through life and through your coaching that we'll talk about shortly.
Yep.
But just from a water polo perspective, that mental strength, mental resilience.
Yeah. It's a tricky one. If I think, what has happened for me, I guess, Magnus, over the time has been that my perspective on it has changed a lot. And the shift for me has been, as an Olympian, I felt like it was all about harder, tougher, stronger. Remove all the stress and pressure, set goals and chase them.
Yep.
That seemed to be the mode of the day. Yeah. What I've learned since is that, and what the science shows too, particularly the science of psychological flexibility, shows that at best, that's a third of what you need. And what I've become fascinated by is this evidence-based, World Health Organization clinical trials in 2021 from a 1982 start, is that what we are, instead of trying to build people into brick walls, right? Because if you hit a brick wall hard enough with a sledgehammer, what happens? It cracks. What we are trying to do with the science of psychological flexibility is to create trampolines. So to absorb the hit and bounce back, absorb the hit, bounce back. And that is a much better model. When you think about even that example I gave before of the curveballs of life, what you want to think about is how, resilience gets thrown around a lot, I think. Yes. Hence why I do like the idea of psychological flexibility, but that image is the standout image to me around what it's about. because it's not, you can't fight reality. Reality will always win. So how do we learn to work with it in a different way? That's what I'm all about from a sort of mindset standpoint.
I love that analogy of the trampoline and the brick wall. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. And look, I think the other part that I find interesting and more, and you and I have spoken about this a lot as well, right, is the intersection between physiology and psychology and the body and the mind, and almost the, science is just bringing them closer and closer together, and the interrelationship of those things. And that is the part that I find most fascinating, as opposed to seeing, here's your body, you just do weights and that'll look after itself, and here's your mind and you just do visualization, that'll look after itself. The distinction between the two, or the duality, I think doesn't really serve us in terms of how you help people work through challenging situations and ultimately, and manage stress and pressure, navigate change, deliver when it matters. So it's still that performance angle to it too, but also you want to be the person that you want to be in the process.
Yes, yeah. So just expand on that whole mind-body connection. So with and come back to the sporting situation. I know there's a lot of similarities between business and sport, but when you're doing that mind work and keeping that mind flexibility, how important is it obviously to be working on your physicality as well?
Super important. And I had this conversation with a client 2 days ago. I said he's going through a really challenging 2-month period, and I said, so give me a score. How challenging is it at work? And he said, it'd be a 9 or 10 out of 10 at the moment. I was like, okay, cool. Now talk to me about your training. What are you doing? How's it all going? And he said, I'm doing 6 sessions a week. Tell me about the intensity. High intensity. Okay, cool. How's your sleep going? How's your diet? How's your water? All that stuff that you inevitably unpack. But what was happening is if he's 10 out of 10 at work, or 9 out of 10 at work, and then 9 or 10 out of 10 in his training in terms of effort and exertion intensity, I said, where is the buffer? Where is the buffer here? How are you showing up at home? All that kind of stuff. And the way I tend to think about it is, if you think about it as a system of cognitive emotional load that's going on at work and physical load that's going on in your training, then you just can't operate at 10 out of 10 for everything, or 20 out of 20 in that instance, for everything across the board all the time. You got to, and so I think the analogy from sport that I find most interesting is that the better you get at something, the better you get at your sport, the more important recovery becomes. Yep. And that was a lesson that took a while to drill in, and I think I've learned many times over.
Well, it's a lesson I'm still learning. It's balance, right?
We all are, yeah. And it's allocation of attention and focus and time and effort and energy, and how are you refilling your cup, how are you intentionally recovering before you need it as well. I mean, I'm going to go have a cold tub today. I try to do that each week, but it's about prevention rather than cure, because if you've got to the point where you now need to recover, that's where the pickles start to happen in my experience.
It's proactivity.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. And seeing it as a compounding behavior that will set you up for the long game. It may feel like at the time that it's a distraction or you're underdoing it. And this guy was wanting to run an ultra marathon in two months' time, right? And I said, what's more important? And I know it's long game, and it's a big long game. And I said, what's more important, your long game or your ultra? And he said, and what's more important, the work stuff or the ultra? And he said, the work stuff for sure in terms of the long game. Okay, cool. Well, recognize that you can do another ultra another time. You may be in a condition to run it, but if you keep going like you're going from a training standpoint whilst this load is going on at work, you're definitely, you'll get sick, you'll break down, or you might get through it. But you're definitely increasing your risk of not being able to play your longest game. And I think that's often a big challenge.
All right, transition. How did you find that transition from, full-time professional athlete almost into the business world? And was it a forced transition or was it a planned transition?
Good point. 2 ways. Well, one is the transition felt Easy. So I got back. Yeah, I got back from the Olympics. I had 2 weeks of contentment, and then I figured I'd start asking myself, what's next? So this was one of the things, and again, in hindsight, that I thought the Olympics and going to an Olympics was going to solve my challenge of, am I enough? Am I good enough? Who am I? And I figured that would make all my tough stuff and suffering go away, right? Didn't. 2 weeks of contentment, and then the restlessness began. I then started a business, a digital marketing business, with a business partner who is still running that business now, which is awesome, Adam. And we started that, might have been 2 months after I got back from the Olympics. And when I came back from the Olympics, I thought, what's going to fill this void? Like, I've put so much effort into this.
So you made the decision back when you're in 2004 that after those Olympics, that was going to be it? You were going to transition out?
I didn't know for sure, no. But I didn't know what was going to be next.
Yep.
And I didn't know whether water polo was going to be more of it. But I thought, I'll try this business thing because he and I both had job offers at the time. I figured it was time to get a job at least because I'd played professionally in Spain. I'd sort of taken a lot of the time off in the lead up to the Olympics to just focus on training. And I was really interested in getting into work. And we started the business, and I realised that rapidly was drawing my attention. And all of a sudden, for me anyway, I was more interested in the business than I was in water polo. And I was like,
just progressive.
This is interesting, yeah. And what I noticed was I played another World Champs in 2005, but then I got dropped from the team in 2006 for a tournament that was here in Australia, and that hurt.
Yeah.
But on reflection, I thought, you know what? You haven't put in the work. Nowhere near the work that I was doing pre-Athens. And
so you're
that was because
business focused.
Exactly. I was fascinated by this challenge of business and starting one. And, we had job opportunities, but we both said, well, we can either go study business, take a job, or we can have a crack at ourselves. Like, neither of us had any dependence. We had a laptop on the back of our parents' deck and, making cold calls to people.
Having a crack?
Having a red hot crack, yeah.
Right, well done.
So, and got government support at the time, and that definitely helped. But it was like, okay, well, it's a skill like any other. Let's get started. And, began the entrepreneurial journey, which I've been forever grateful for.
Yeah. So entrepreneurial journey, and obviously sounds pretty impressive. You're an award-winning entrepreneur. How do you win an award for being an entrepreneur?
Oh, we had a couple of bits of recognition over the time. I mean, what does it mean? I don't know. From different places. I don't know how much data sat behind it, but it's nice to be recognised for the effort that's going in, and certainly our perceived effort of what was going into it as well. We again, same deal. I sat down with a couple of the parents that I'd met through water polo and said, hey, look, I'm starting this out. Would you be a mentor for me? So that same pattern that I'd been applying in water polo, applied in business, and tried to find people who'd already done it or done it way better than I had or could hope to do, and learn from them. And people were so generous with their time. And I guess they also saw that I was willing to take whatever they said and run. That
ultimate. I think it's the ultimate. Action. When you're a real student and you're going to people with that learning mindset, then people are very, very willing to help.
Yeah, and I think they'll initially help you, and then if they see you take action, then they'll commit to the ongoing process of that, right? And some of those relationships have continued to last decades. Yeah. So I've been really fortunate in that too. But there's so much to learn about business.
So what about next? Then there's author in the bio as well, which is, like I mentioned earlier, pretty impressive. So walk us through the journey of writing a book. Yeah,
well, Adam and I, we were writing as a part of what we did for our content marketing, essentially for our digital marketing business. We were interested in thought leadership and speaking and how that might generate leads for our business at the time. And then when we decided we got to this point, we were actually approached by a publisher to say, hey, we're looking for social media content. It was when social media was blowing up. Facebook was, all of that stuff was changing the world really in lots of different ways, for better and worse, as we've found out. But they were looking for content specifically on social media and web marketing and that sort of stuff. So Adam and I, it had always been on our bucket list. We spent 6 months then writing 80,000, 90,000 words. We did a couple of off-sites down in Jiroa, down on the south coast of New South Wales, where we sat down and figured out the chapters. We pulled all the content that we'd created already, pulled it together into a structure, and then ultimately got it published by Wiley. And that was a pretty intense journey, to be honest, but really fulfilling too, because it documented and captured our thinking for that decade that we'd spent. It was 2005 we started the business, and 2013 that the book was released. So 8 years of our best thinking captured in a book, and felt really good.
Mate, that's fantastic. Well done. It's again very, very impressive, I think. So I've actually written a little book. It's only a little ebook, and hopefully be released in the next month or two. So
awesome.
watch out for that one.
I'm looking forward to it, mate.
All right, so now let's talk about coaching. Now, every professional athlete has a coach, and obviously in the last couple of decades, almost every professional, CEO, business owners are reaching out and use coaching. You obviously, that's a bit of your prime focus at the moment. And so what sort of people use your services, and what sort of people can benefit from it?
Yeah. I mean, it's a bit like coaching is an interesting one for me, because it's really holding up the mirror and this assumption that the person has all of their own best answers. And I love that. I love the idea of changing the direction from an outward focus to an inward focus, and helping them peel back the onion for themselves on what really matters to them, what truly matters to them. And when I see people connect with that and meaningfully align themselves around that, what I see is, you get the benefits of a reconnection to purpose, a reconnection to values, often, the improvement, not just in single spheres of work, but across the board, so it is enormously fulfilling from my standpoint. And for me, I guess it's been a long history of coaching in a lot of ways, being coached as an athlete and seeing some great coaches and some less great coaches and learning a lot from both. I then began to really apply that with our teams in the business, and I found that my preferred style of leading and managing people was, how can I help this person get what they want, and also align that with the business, but help them understand the answers for themselves and find the solutions for themselves, because otherwise I'm becoming the bottleneck all the time. And so if I think about the chapters, one was I was being coached and how good could I be and how much could I contribute to the team. Then it became about my team. How good could my team be? And that was the question that really drove me when I think about particularly the digital marketing business. And then now I feel like it's, okay, well, how well can I help others operate as individuals or teams or companies? How can I make a contribution in that ripple effect of coaching, which is also part of the fascinating thing to me, is that, each person then, if they have that sense of fulfillment, if they can feel like they're operating in alignment with who they truly are. And I think that's the challenge. And so the people that I've been working with have included SAS soldiers, pro athletes, senior executives, founders, entrepreneurs, a real host of male, female, there's a real host of different people. But the one theme that emerged was this idea of a top performer who is facing a major shift of one description or another, who needs to reinvent for what comes next. And sometimes they don't even know what's coming next. And so if I think of a pro athlete or a soldier who finishes a career due to health injury, health issues or what have you, there may not be a plan. And sometimes it can feel like they're stepping off a cliff. The systems and structures of an organisation, and this applies absolutely to execs and founders as well, whether that's a successful exit or whether it's forced or chosen, it doesn't seem to make too much difference. But the fear is what's coming next, and that void of, I've got an empty diary, I've got no one driving, no organisation driving my days and how I allocate my time and focus, often a bit lost in terms of feeling a bit adrift or lacking meaning and purpose when their identity has been so tied up in what they've been doing. And then, they need to rebuild a plan. They need the systems and structures. They need the toolkit to manage the stress and pressure. They need to assess where they're at right now and understand where they're going. And then ultimately that ongoing support and accountability for course correction as needed.
I think needed and wanted is a big thing that those people, that's something that I went through that journey after I sort of tapped out of a career. Just like you said, it was the useful, but at the same time, just actually not having as much, nobody needed you.
Yes,
So.
relevance is a really big issue because suddenly the inbound phone calls don't happen. That drops off a cliff. The other thing is people don't pick up your calls. That drops off a cliff, or they take way longer to get back to you because
You're no longer that person.
Yeah, it's fascinating, isn't it?
Yeah. All right, your speaker, professional, international speaker journey. What are they? Just touch on briefly. What are the aspirations for that moving forward?
Look, the speaking part for me is I've recognised I can't impact. I have a big, hairy, audacious goal of, which you may be familiar with that language, Jim Collins special.
Yes.
Love Jim Collins' work, of impacting 100 million people plus. I don't know. I have no idea how I'm going to do that. But if I think about that, if I do that one-on-one coaching, that's not going to happen. So the speaking begins. So the two other things I do then, as well as the coaching, is I do speaking and workshops, all particularly focused around that psychological flexibility. How do we develop it in groups and companies and teams? And then the other part is content. So content to me is infinitely scalable. If I can have an impact through the articles I write, the videos I produce, whatever future content looks like as well, podcast perhaps like this one, then that allows me to scale impact is what it's about for me, because I think we were talking about this, but my purpose is to change the world's relationship to suffering. And if I'm going to do that, then the first person that needs to happen with is me. The best purposes that I've seen, in fact, are the ones that get turned on the individual, and that's where the work starts. Very Gandhi-esque, be the change you want to see in the world. And then I need to figure out how I can do that, at large with groups and at scale. So, but for now, they're the three avenues forward for the year ahead, Magnus.
All right. So psychological flexibility. Just walk us through quickly. What are the principles behind that?
Yeah. So the science is around psychological flexibility is called ACT, or acceptance and commitment therapy. If you're a therapist, which I'm not a psychologist. I never play one on the web. I'm a coach, and therefore it's acceptance and commitment training. That means three principles. So the three foundational pillars of that are a model called the ACT triflex. Doesn't really matter. But if you were to visualize a triangle, in the bottom left of that triangle, you write the words open up. At the top of the triangle, be present. And then the bottom right of that triangle, do what matters. So that's open up, bottom left, be present at the top, do what matters, bottom right. Opening up is not about opening up to other people, even though that may be an action that you choose to take. Opening up is about being willing to sit with your own brand of discomfort, your own sense of suffering, and open up to the fact that that is reality, that is a part of who we are, that no one in any kind of audit of their lives escapes it, that we all experience it, and then the question then becomes, how do we work with it? So that's the first bit, open up. The second part, be present, speaks to mindfulness. And mindfulness, there's so many practices and so much material. The science on mindfulness is really in. Then the third part, do what matters, is all around purpose, values, what energizes you, who is important to you. Is your own name on the list of who is important to you? That is the number one oversight that I see in groups and in individuals, where is your own name on the list of people who is important to you. So exploring those things, and the more you can refine what matters, the more you can learn to open up. Because the analogy I use here, Magnus, is If I was to smash glass on the floor and say, hey, Magnus, shoes off, let's do some motivational walking. You keen? You'd be like, oh, no, thanks, Toby. No. But if I say, let me change one condition on that, and that is that bring to mind the person or people most important to you in the world. They're on the other side of the glass. They're in distress and they need your help.
Yep.
Would you be willing to walk across the glass?
100%.
Yeah. And so what happens in that moment teaches us a couple of things. One is none of us like pointless pain. We're no good at it. Humans don't do well. The second is if we can get clear, really clear on what is truly important to us, humans are extraordinary, absolutely extraordinary, and not just enduring pain, but embracing it in service of what we truly care about. And so clarity on that is really important. And the third thing is what's interesting in that is that in that moment, you went from no way, Toby, to 100% Toby. In that moment, the pain hasn't changed. The glass hasn't changed. Your feet haven't changed. The potential repercussions for your life haven't changed. The only thing that has changed is your relationship to the pain. And so that is the opportunity, is to change the relationship to it rather than fighting the suffering, to change the relationship. Because typically most people don't get anxious about putting clothes in the dryer, say. It's because we don't care. So the fact that the suffering shows up, the fact that we experience tough internal experiences is not because we are weak or broken or inadequate or something is missing. It is because we care. The more we care, the more likely it is to show up. If I think about my Olympic journey, the day I arrived in the Athens village, I thought I had a stomach infection. The day I left, it stopped. A physiological response to the fear and to the importance, to the anxiety of how I wanted to perform in that moment. And that is the kind of stuff that I love helping people with, because if you can recognize it, learn to work with it, open up to the fact that this is the truth. This is why the yin-yang symbol holds a truth. There's black and white, and then there's a white dot in the black teardrop, and there's a black dot in the white teardrop, because they are inextricably linked. We can't have a high without low. We can't have triumph without trial. We don't get love without suffering. That is what we need to work with rather than fighting reality all the time.
Brilliant. That was absolutely brilliant. Just have to pause for a minute just to take that in, mate. That was very, very well said. Very, very true. Very, very true. Speaking about suffering, do you mind sharing a personal setback and how and what got you through it?
Boy, so many. Well, one of the reasons I'm so passionate about psychological flexibility and the ACT evidence base and open up, be present, do what matters, is because I was introduced to it in 2016, and at the time I had a shoulder reconstruction from throwing a ball as hard as I could for 20 years, and it had gone to the dogs. So I wasn't sleeping well at all. I was on a couch upright for 8 weeks pretty much because it had been so sore. My second daughter had silent reflux, and so she wasn't sleeping either. So there I was with kind of a cast or a sling trying to rock a very unsettled daughter. My father-in-law was in hospital with leukemia, and my own father had died from a brain tumour. And I've come to call this period of my life the crucible. And there's what's interesting in this crucible and what I've learned since is, one, that psychological flexibility, evidence-based, and the practices that surround that are the things that I found incredibly useful through that period, and hence why I feel so passionately about it. The other thing is that what I've learned is that in a crucible, there's a huge amount of energy, it's painful, and the heat is there, right? You feel the heat on. But ultimately, if I think about where I've come through that period, is that now I feel as though it burned away the things that didn't serve me, and I feel, whole and enough, and with a contribution to make, and really meaningful one to me that I really want to pursue into the world. And so, as painful as that was through that period, and I found myself on the M1 just outside IKEA, between Brisbane and the Gold Coast, just bawling my eyes out one day. And I was like, what on earth is going on? And it took a while to unpack that. But yeah, that the intensity of those life's curveballs really coming into this setting, it's not so much about the pity, but what shows up with pressure is the cracks show up. And for me, that was work, in fact. And that led to me resigning from the digital marketing company that I'd started and ultimately handing the shares back to my business partner. It led me to really exploring this psychological flexibility stuff. And it's led down a lot of paths, but enormously grateful in hindsight. I wouldn't change it, but tough time at the time.
Interesting though, because if it's one thing and then obviously then there's another thing, then there's another thing, which is obviously it compounds, and that's when it gets worse and worse. But let's flip that for a minute, and then we've talked about this before, you and I, just in the importance of compounding in moving forward, doing the reps.
Yeah. Well, yes. So compounding was what I wrote in an article last year as my biggest insight for last year, which to think that it took me 44 years to figure that out, or to truly understand what that means. And so what that means for me and when it comes to reps is that I feel like this year I completely changed how I set goals. So instead of setting goals this year, I set practices. And the question I asked myself is, what are the practices that I feel I wanted to do and pursue for the rest of my life? And therefore, that speaks directly to your question about the reps, because a practice is really the recognition that you're taking an action. And there's this beautiful saying in the Bhagavad Gita, which is a Hindu book. It was apparently the book that Gandhi tried to live his life by, that I find fascinating, which is action in service of others without expectation of result. So action in service of others without expectation of result. And if you think about that from a reps or a compounding standpoint, it's doing that rep as best as you possibly can without expecting an immediate result. And if you think about, I know you know an enormous amount about strength and conditioning and nutrition and all of these things and hydration and all of that stuff, you don't get an instant result. You don't do one rep in the gym and get stronger. You do get stronger, but you can't notice the difference.
No.
But every single one that you do, and if you can stick with it for a long enough time period, then you can. And what I say to my clients is, it's got to be a minimum. It's a 12-month commitment. If I'd coach with a client, it's a 12-month commitment, because what you are on in terms of your change process from wherever you are now to wherever you want to either get back to or go beyond is a compounding curve. And so you won't see results at the beginning. They will be invisible. But if you stick with it, the results happen in the back half of a process.
There's a great book by a bloke by the name of Jeff Olson, no relation, called The Slight Edge. And that is epic in speaking those exact truths of just the importance of it. And even when you look at it from a financial standpoint, if you put a certain amount of money away every single week, well, you're not noticing it too much. But in 20 years, 30 years, the old compounding principle is very, very visible.
Yeah, and Atomic Habits is another great book by James Clear. One of the things I think is, if people can work on why they're doing it, so the Simon Sinek stuff, start with why.
Yep.
But if you can truly get clear on purpose and values and who's important and what's important, and then attach the new habit to that and then get started. Like Atomic Habits is incredible for its deconstruction of how to create easily adherable habits, right? But to understand why now, not just why, but why now? Why is now the time to make this change for yourself? Because it's about building up the value proposition in your own mind to even begin the reps, and then recognize that it's a compounding curve. To begin, know that it's a compounding curve, and then be willing to stick the yards to let the compounding do its work. Because anything, and in fact, it's almost to the extent, I heard it beautifully phrased by an author, Nassim Nicholas Taleb. I don't know if you've come across his work, Anti-Fragile.
No.
Oh, you'd love it. It's a ripping book. Changed my worldview. But the idea that he had is that if I am looking for a shortcut, I'm on the wrong path. And that's a really interesting lens to review what it is that you're doing. If I'm looking for a quick weight loss, I'm on the wrong path. I think in those instances I've recognised that people haven't quite got to why they really want this, and why now is the right time to do it. And that's okay. It's not about perfection in any way. And in fact, recognizing the compounding curve means that you can let go a bit of the perfection, recognize there'll be setbacks, you know, and keep going, because you know that the action of its own is worthwhile, even if this is the one. Yeah.
Because also when you've got that why, that gives it some sustainability, because it's a little bit like your example of walking on the glass. You've got a strong enough why, well, you'll get there.
Yes.
And if your why's not strong enough, well, then even if you do start it, you're not going to finish it.
Yes. Spot on. Yep.
Through your coaching journey, have you found any commonality between any of your clients? Like, is there a bit of a standout problem that, you know, perhaps we could address a solution for?
The commonality, which I only realised, maybe 18 months into being out on my own as a coach in this most recent iteration of business for me, was I went back through all my clients, and here were this diverse set of people who I loved working with. And I was looking for the common thread, and it definitely wasn't a demographic. And there's age ranges from, I think, 21 through to 63 for the people I've worked with in the last 12 months. And the commonality is the major shift. Someone who is facing a shift that feels like they're about to either they're facing it and they're about to step off a cliff, or make a decision to step off a cliff, metaphorically speaking, into the unknown, or they've already taken that step and they're trying to figure out how it happens. And so that major shift was the bit, and the recognition that some change is incremental, and that's fine. What I've recognised, and the bit that really lights me up, is that I'm not that interested in incremental change. I had someone come to me the other day and say, "Hey, I've been told I need to work on my communication skills." I'm not that guy. That's not that interesting a problem for me.
No.
The interesting part for me is the shift large enough, whether that's the step up to a new role, or the step out of an organisation, or complete career change, or is what's going on, you know, in and around work.
Why big enough?
Is the why big enough? Exactly. Yeah. What's the kind of value proposition for someone to truly commit to a 12-month thing for themselves, that because of the size of the change that they want to make? And so that's been the common theme for the one-on-one work anyway.
Thank you. Quick fire question time. You ready?
Ready.
Okay. Standout Olympic memory.
I walked into the opening ceremony. My family had been texting me. So I'm one of 5 kids, mum and dad up in the stand. And I walked in through the tunnel, and as I was looking up on the right. They said, "We're up on your right as you come in." And as I walked in, I saw them up in the crowd. Still gives me goosebumps. And I jumped up on a speaker and saw them and connected with them. As you can tell, still feel it, because in that moment, they were the people I wanted to share it with the most out of everyone. And to see them up there was super special. Yep.
Wow. Describe yourself in 3 words.
I normally say love is very important to me. It's a core value of mine. So love, gratitude, humility, exploration, contribution. I realise that's 5, but I'll take 5 anyway. And all of those mean different. So, you know, love to me is both is not the feeling. All 5 of those things are actually, they're not feelings or intentions. They are, and they're certainly not words. They are pathways for action. So what does love look like here? What does humility look like here? What does gratitude look like here? What does exploration look like? And what does contribution look like? How can I contribute? And so they're the 5 words that really guide me in my day-to-day actions, yeah.
Who's the best coach you've ever had, and why?
Water polo-wise, there've been two standout coaches. My first was István Gorgenyi, who was my under-7 Hungarian guy, Hungarian Olympic silver medalist, amazing water polo player of his own right. He was our under-17 Australian coach, and he ended up coaching the Australian women's team to gold medal in Sydney, which is amazing. Lovely guy as well, super good human. And Dan Marsden was also an incredible coach. Had an amazing knack for helping a team recognise what was the really simple first principles of water polo, and drew it back to three things: intensity, focus, patience, do it. Sorry, 4 things. So intensity, focus, and patience were his 3 things. He had a remarkable knack for getting it down to very, very simple, universally applicable principles, and I think that's quite a gift. In business, I've been blessed with lots of different mentors in different spaces, but and then even more recently in my coaching experience, I've had Peter Barr, who's he's done more than 25,000 hours as an executive coach, one of the first internationally accredited master certified coaches here in Australia. So in this chapter of my career anyway, he's been invaluable. I've been so lucky, Magnus, in so many ways from so many people. Like the only answer is to pay it forward, right?
Absolutely. What do you miss most about not competing?
Being that fit.
The greatest lesson you've ever learned?
Ask for help.
What are you most obsessed about?
Trying to bring all of who I am to everything I do in as many moments of as many days as possible.
The best thing about the future? Come back to that one?
Yeah. I mean, there's so much. That's part of the challenge with that one. Yeah.
What gives you energy?
My wife, my family, my daughters, my health, surfing, my brothers and sisters, friends, being in the environment, being active. It feels like, I feel incredibly fortunate at the moment, because I feel as though nearly everything I'm doing in a day and in a week and in a month is energy replenishing rather than draining. The lion's share, and I feel incredibly grateful for that.
What's your number one success habit?
The one I'm enjoying the most at the moment is a cold bath each week. Yep. Half an hour or 15 minutes of Wim Hof, and then followed by a cold bath.
Perfect. What the best question you've ever been asked?
I'd probably reframe that briefly, if you don't mind. Is the best question I've asked myself, I think, would be, what is my purpose? And it took a damn long time to get to a response to that, but also recognizing in that I can change at any time. So yes, sure, it is what it is at the moment, but help change the world's relationship to suffering, but I can change that.
Legacy. What are people saying about you when you're gone?
That I loved, that I was loved, that I made a meaningful contribution to humanity. That I put more into the pool than I took out.
Yep. What is the one thing you're currently working on to improve about yourself?
I am working on my strength. I've come off the back of 2.5 years of a hamstring injury, and am working through, the strength to get that. I've got it back to where it's functional. I just did 8 hours of surfing last weekend at a surf camp, lit me up. and it was awesome and grateful for that.
It's a hidden talent no one knows about.
I think that asking for help, I would say. Yep.
Favourite book or author?
Favourite book is Dune by Frank Herbert. I'm reading it for the 6th time at the moment.
The toughest and hardest physical activity you've achieved?
Olympics.
Advice to a younger self?
Keep going.
Advice to current self?
Keep going.
Finish this sentence. Last question. I believe.
I believe in our own capacity, in humanity's capacity for being extraordinary, and and the pursuit of that, and to be all of who I believe in, people being all of who they are in as many moments of every day, of as many days as possible. And I also believe that we are all enough.
Well said. What a great way to finish. Thank you so much for your time, Toby. I know you're a very, very busy man, and very much appreciate your time and some incredible insights, mate. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Magnus. Thanks for having me, man. This has been heaps of fun. I really appreciate it.
Cheers.